Hello everyone and welcome to the Complete Python Programming course. In this video, we'll talk about Python's lists. This video is part of the beginner tutorial. If you are familiar with lists and looking for more in-depth information about their implementation, please see my Python lists tutorial under the intermediate level. Lists are one of the most important data types. In some languages, they are called arrays. A list is an indexed container of values, where each value corresponds to an index in the list. Python lists are dynamic arrays, but we will talk about that in the intermediate level. In this video, we'll see how we can use lists in our program. In our previous examples, we created lists, names, James, Mary, and David. We can print our list to the screen, names, and Python will print my list to the screen. Python 3, main.py, and Python printed my list to the screen. Lists have indices. Each value has its own index starting with 0, and we can access each value by its own index. If we try to access the value at index 1, we will get Mary. If we try to access the value at index 0, we will get James. Notice that we always created our lists with some values, and we never tried to add something to the list. It will be useless if we can't add something to it. Python allows us to add values to our lists using the append method. Names dot append and the value you want to add. Let's try to add Linda to our list. And let's print our list before so we can see how that progresses. Names, and let's print names after the append. Let's run our code. And notice that Linda was added to my list. Append adds a value to the end of a list. James still at index 0, Mary still at index 1, David at index 2, and Linda was added at index 3. You can right away print names 3, and you can access the value by its index just like any other value, because your new list from now on contains Linda at index 3. We can also remove values from our list. Instead of append, names, pop. The pop method, notice it's a method, it has parentheses. Pop method removes a value from the end of the list. Let's run our code. And notice that David was removed from my list. If I try to access David now, I will get an error because I don't have David in my list after the pop statement. Now that's easy enough. Append adds a value to the end of my list. Pop removes a value from the end of my list. Sometimes we need to add values at a specific index in our list. How about adding Susan between James and Mary? Names, insert the index we want to insert at, in this case 1, I want it after James, and the value I want to add, Susan. Let's print our list, print names, and let's print that again after we added its insert, not that, insert after at index 1. Let's run our code, and James, Mary, David, that's my list, and after that I have James, Susan, Mary, David. What happened here, when I inserted, I didn't override the value, I just added a new value at the index I selected and shifted everything to the right. Everything after that was shifted to the right. So let's see here, print names 1, and let's print after the insertion. We will go and print names 1. Let's see what that returns. Clear and run our code. And notice that I have James, Mary, David, and I accessed Mary by its index 1. I added Susan at index 1, and I accessed my list. Now my list had Susan at index 1, and when I printed the value at index 1, it's now Susan. Mary is at index 2 from now on. I hope this is clear enough. So append, add the value to the end of the list. Insert, add a value at a specific index. Pop removes a value from the end of the list. Pop can be used in a little different way. Pop names, pop and print names. Pop method will remove the last value in my list, but Python is generous enough to allow me to select the index I want to remove. I can provide the index here, pop index. So pop without any value would remove the last value in the list. Pop with an index would remove the value at that index. Let's try that. And notice that Mary is gone, and now my list have James and David. David was shifted. Once I removed an index, everything is shifted to keep the list indexed correctly. Lists will always have indexes starting or indices starting from 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4 to the end. You cannot have gaps in the indexes or indices of your list. Python will always shift values when you remove something from your list. Python will shift the values to keep your list ordered correctly. Before we move forward, I would like to present another concept to just keep this lesson in line with the other lessons. Numbers, or numbers is better. And numbers is an empty list. It has no values, no indices. It's just an empty list. How about adding some numbers to my list? I could go like number, and I just use the append method and add a number to my list. But sometimes you need to add too many values to your list at once, and it will be very inefficient to just add them by hand. Let's try to do that in a different way, using a loop. For number in Python range allows me to loop a range of numbers. I want 100 numbers, and for each one of these numbers, I want to add the value to my list. Numbers, append, and num. Let's print numbers before, which is an empty list, print numbers. And let's print our list after, print numbers. Let's run our code and see what we get. Notice that before I ran my loop, I had my numbers empty, and then after the loop, I have my numbers containing 0 to 99. Python very quickly added the numbers to my list. Let's take this one step further and see what we can do with this. What if you are asked to add only even numbers in your range to your list? Now that's simple enough. If number bigger than 0 and number modulus 2 equals 0, append the number. Let's try that and then come back to talk about what we did. And notice that I have the numbers 246 to 98 in my list. It added only even numbers. The modulus operator returns the remainder after division. How about switching that to odd numbers? That's also easy enough. Not equals 0 will return odd numbers. And let's run that. And Python added all the odd numbers in our range, which is 1 to 99, to our list. you can add all the multiplication of a 3 to your list. 3, and that will add all the values that are multiples of a 3 to your list. Let's take a step back and go back to our names list. We talked about the append, the pop, the insert, and the pop with an index. What if you are asked to empty your list, or for some reason you want to empty your list? That's also easy. Print names and names dot clear. This will remove all the numbers or all the values from your list. Let's print that. Print names, understand our code, and clear, and run. And I have now an empty list because I used the clear method. One more thing I would like to talk about is using the list to find a value. Now, let's see how that goes. List names dot index of a specific value. James. I'll call it val. I will create a variable called val. I'll print val. If you have a long list and you want to search something in it, you can ask Python to find a value, an index by its value. Let's try that and see what Python returns. And Python returns 0. The index of James is 0. Now, how about Mary? And we run our code, and Python returned 1. Mary is at index 1 of my list. Let's try something else. Let's add James again and try to see what we can do with that. Names, remove. Notice that we use the pop, which removed a value from the end. Pop at index removed the value that is at a specific index. Now I'm using the remove method. The remove method works on the values instead of the keys. So let's try that, Mary, and let's print the names after we use the remove method. Let's run our code, and notice that James, David, and James again, I don't have Mary in my list because the remove method will search your list for a specific entry and remove it from your list. How about James? It exists twice in my list. Let's try that. And Python removed only the first one from my list. It didn't remove the second one because it will remove only one value from your list. One more thing we should talk about is the returned values. Names.pop val equals names.pop. Let's print val and see what that returns. And Python returned James. The pop method removes a value and returns it. Remove value and returns it. Even if you supply an index, if you remove the value at index 1, Python will return the value for you to use if you want. You can ignore this value, you can do it that way, but if you need value for some reason, you can do it that way, and now you have the value that you removed from your list, that you popped from your list. Notice that these are methods that Python is providing us to make working with lists much easier. Let's try one more method. The len method. The len method is very important. Often you want to know the list or the how many values you have in your list. Let's try that. Len names. The len method works on many things. One list is one of them. Let's print that. Print len names. The len method returns the length of the list. Notice that it says 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. It has 4 items. Another method we want to talk about is the count method. names, count Mary. It will count how many times the value Mary appeared in your list. Let's try that. And it returned 1. For James, it should return 2. All these methods can come handy when you are working with lists. And this count James equals 2. One more thing you can do with your list. Let's remove James. Let's call our lists boys. We have James, David, and let's add some more name, Michael, and let's add also Richard. Let's add girls, Mary, Linda, and Carol. I have 2 lists, boys and girls. Let's see what we can do with that. I'll create here a list called names. It's an empty list. I would like to add all the boys to my names list. That's easy enough. You can do it with a loop for name in boys, names, append name. Let's print names after that. Print names, and this should return all the boys added to the list name. And then you can do the same for girl, for name in girls, and names append the name. And that also should add the girls to your list. Now you have the list with all the names that you added to your list. But there is an easier method to do that in Python. Names extend with boys. Names extend with boys. Names extends one list with the values from another list. The boys list has names. The names is empty. Let's try that and see how it goes. Run our code, and it added all the boys to the names list. And we can do the same, names.extend with girls. And the names list now should contain all the entries from the both lists, boys and girls. Notice that when you operate something like that, the boys and girls lists are not changed at all. Nothing happens to them. You are just using them to do something else, boys and girls. There is no change to them whatsoever. Python will just read them, take the value, put them somewhere else without altering them in any way whatsoever. If we run this code, you will see that clear and our girls, girl, and let's run our code again. And notice that the lists are not changed in any way. You can use them after that without any change. It's just that you have the values added to the names list. I don't want actually to make this video any longer because we will talk about lists and we will see them in action in future lessons. But for now, I would like to just mention 2 things. List. Let's add all these names to one list. And let's add boys as well. How about sorting? Sorting is a very important thing in computers, and Python can do that for us. Names, sort. Let's print names after the sort. Notice that my names list have Mary, Linda, Carol. There is no order. Let's try the sort and then see what sort does. And now I have Carol, David, James. Everything is ordered by the first character of each word. The sort method, sort the list in a place. Your names list is now changed. Everything is shifted to be in the right index. If you access names after that, as we did here, you will have the new list, not the old list. Just one more example to make sure that everything is clear. Characters equals empty list and string. Let's call it string, or greeting for easy. Greeting is easier, and let's make it good morning. Strings are sequences. Sequences can be looped. For character in greeting, characters append character. Very similar example to that. Range. Oh, we have to print that. Print characters. And let's see what that do. And now our characters is a list containing all the characters from good morning in order. Let's try to print that inside the loop. Print characters. Notice that this will help you understand what's going on. Clear, and we made a mistake somewhere. Print. Let's run that again. Notice that I looped the greeting variable, and for each character I added it to my list. In this case, you can see that the characters or the list after each iteration. So you will see how Python works. With each iteration, all Python did was appending the character to the list. Here you can add condition if you want. If you want to check if a specific character in your list and adding it only if it doesn't exist. In other words, if you want only to take unique characters from your string and adding them to your list, you can use the N operator. Now, if character in characters, don't do anything. Now we need to do that not in. If character is not in my character, add it to the characters of list. Let's see what that produces. Clear, and run our code, and notice that it added the G with first iteration. After that, add the O because it doesn't exist. After that, we use the N operator to check if the character in my list. The N operator is a very important one. You use it all the time on lists, and in this case, we use it to check if a character is in the list, use it. If a character in the list, don't use it, otherwise add it to the list. And notice that the result is the unique characters from the string good morning. Let's take another minute and talk about just the N operator with lists. Let's go with names again. Names, let's add them very quickly here. James, Lisa, Mark, and Carol. The N operator will return true or false according to your condition. So print James in names. We talked about that. I just feel like adding it here just in case you didn't see the other video. Let's see what that returns. And this will return true. James is in our list. Notice that if I change this to James, it will not return, it will say it's false because we don't have James with a small letter in our list. There is a lot more information about lists, but I don't want to talk about them now. We will talk about them in future lessons. For now, this is all we need to know to be able to work with lists and use them in examples that will help us understand different concepts of Python or different parts of this tutorial. Try to create some lists and try to loop them, try to work with them with your computer. You will not learn if you don't type on your computer and try things by yourself. If you like this video, support the channel by subscribing. Until next lesson, have a great time.